So today the session is going to be focused on the theme of secondary occupancy. So we're going to have one case study from Nigeria, from Northeast Nigeria. It's going to be presented by one of our speakers, Rhoda Usman. She is an HLP advisor with the IOM Emergency Response Mission in Northeast Nigeria. She's going to present the case. We also have Jim Robinson, our HLP Area of Responsibility Coordinator. He's going to give us a brief 5-minute update before we start the session. And myself, Iberia Lopez, HLP Advisor to the Global Shelter Cluster. So just one quick reminder, the session is going to be recorded. It started recorded now, so just so you know. We're going to start by giving the floor to Jim so he can give us the update before we get back to Rhoda and her Nigeria case. Jim.
Hello, good afternoon, good morning, good evening. Really pleased to be here, and yeah, thanks for this great sort of ongoing collaboration between the HLP Area of Responsibility and the Shelter Cluster. It's really great to be working together. So thank you for a few minutes now just to update you on some of the things that are happening within the HLP AOR. Now, I just had sort of three things really to share about that are things that are either coming up or sort of in process. And we have the sort of broader activities of the AOR working to support you and colleagues in country in your work on sort of humanitarian response. And we're really, just want to emphasize again, whether you have active HLP coordination mechanisms or whether you're facing HLP challenges but don't know where to turn, please do get in touch with Ibere, with myself, with others, and we will try and provide the support and guidance that can help you in some way. So please do reach out. I'll put my contact details in the chat shortly. So three things I wanted to mention. The first is some of you were involved in a consultation we had with the Special Rapporteur on the human rights of IDPs earlier this year, actually, and that report has now been written. It's focused on housing, land and property. And it's an interesting report because it cuts across the kind of humanitarian elements of HLP, but definitely includes the sort of a development lens, as well as looking at issues around climate change and gender as well. So it's trying to pull together a lot of areas for to look at in the round, which I think we would all agree is really important, but doesn't always happen. So the launch event for this report is on the 29th of June, and we've sort of setting up a side event alongside the 47th Human Rights Council, where the report will be formally presented. And there's going to be speakers, will be the Special Rapporteur, Ms. Cecilia Jimenez Damari, and there'll also be speakers from the government of Fiji, as well as the World Bank, NRC, colleagues on climate change and displacement, and from the HLP AOR as well. So there'll be details following about how to join that. It's the 29th of June at 1300 Central European Summer Time. I think that's what the S stands for. But yeah, we'll be sending out details for that. So please look out for that. The second thing I wanted to mention is, well, actually related to the Special Rapporteur report, we'll also be arranging a session where she will present the report to members, colleagues of the HLP AOR, and we're interested to try and get some response from people in country. What does this report mean to you? Are there things that are useful, challenging, that you will draw on to advocate for, or that maybe are new to you or new to considering? So if you would like to be part of that, please do let me know, and yeah, we can sort of arrange a call to set up how you might participate. The second thing I wanted to mention is that we're in the process of developing an advocacy note for use with donors primarily. So to make the case for including sort of due diligence and right verification processes around land, property, natural resources within funding requirements, because we were discussing how do we increase the capacity, increase the awareness around these sort of important issues. And one of the ways we thought we could do that was to have donors making it either a requirement of their funding or actually seeing the need to fund those processes so that they're done well. So we've sort of been drafting a note around why due diligence is important, what it means for risk mitigation, for cross-cutting protection issues, and the importance of it for durable solutions and resilient recovery. So it's part of a wider effort to push for more kind of systematic adoption of the sort of due diligence and processes, and having that work adequately funded and resourced. So we'll be sharing an initial sort of draft to sort of start from, and concept for review and comments and feedback. So that would be great to have your inputs on. And yeah, I mean, if you have any views just even on that idea, please do share them in the chat here. That would be great to hear. Third thing I'll mention is just a quick one. On the 28th of June, as part of the Camp Coordination and Camp Management Clusters Practitioners Day, there'll be an update on the work of the CCCM and HLP working group. So that group started properly meeting sort of this year, and one of the things we've initially been doing is sort of gathering together resources, and we're doing a piece of analysis around where there are some gaps in what already exists, and then a sort of a roadmap for how to address those gaps and what we might do going forward. So there'll be a short presentation around that, and then we'll follow that up in working group meetings in the future. Yeah, so I think that's all from me. I'm just going to put my details in the chat just in case you want to get in touch or ask any questions. And yeah, the only other thing I was thinking about mentioning, Ebere, was the land and shelter due diligence standard, but I thought you might be mentioning that, so I'll leave that. But if you weren't going to, I can do. So, but that's all from me.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Jim. Yeah, just I'm going to mention very quickly. So we have this document that was produced in 2013. It's called the Land and Shelter Due Diligence Standard. And it's been used a lot. It's one of our reference documents for HRP work and shelter work. But it's from 2013, and we think we had a discussion about it, and then we think that it's a good idea to revise it and update it. So we're going to launch an initiative to do that together with all the people that participate in the AOR and the people that are interested in the subject. So we're gonna send out a TOR for that revision, and then ask people to come and join in the work. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen and show a short 2.5 minute video that will introduce the theme of secondary occupancy for you. Just 1 minute, and I'll share it here. Please let me know if you cannot hear the audio.
Land is a different kind of property. Unlike most other goods, land and its attachments, like buildings and houses, can't be picked up and transported to a new place.
Ebere, I can't see
hear
it.
We cannot see it.
Yeah.
Bad the flood, the cyclone.
We could hear it, but we couldn't see it.
You can't see it?
Yeah, just the audio was coming through, but not the
You were
visual.
sharing a different screen. You were sharing the screen of the files.
Yeah.
Oh, I see. Just a second. This is never easy, is it? How about now? How about now?
Yeah, we see a kind of overhead shot looking down on a some kind of settlement.
That's it. That's it. All right, I'm gonna play it again.
Land is a different kind of property. Unlike most other goods, land and its attachments, like buildings and houses, can't be picked up and transported to a new place. Land stays where it is, no matter how bad the flood, the cyclone, or the war. But people move. By the end of 2020, there were over 55 million displaced persons in the world. And when they move, they leave behind their land and houses. Some of these lands and houses will be occupied by others. These secondary occupants may be combatants in the conflict, temporarily using the house as a base or as quarters. Or they can be opportunists who are taking advantage of the situation to grab the property, sometimes with the intention of selling it to unsuspecting buyers. Or they may be waiting to charge the returning family a service fee for taking care of the house while they were away. But secondary occupants can also be a family in need, sheltering in the abandoned property for lack of alternative. They may have been displaced themselves from a neighboring town where the conflict now rages. Sometimes, government authorities, military, or even a judge may have temporarily allocated an empty IDP house or land to another family who takes possession of the property in good faith. Secondary occupancy is a common post-war occurrence. It can take many forms and no single solution will fit all cases. So how can humanitarian actors and shelter practitioners navigate this phenomenon? What measures can we take to mitigate the risks associated with working in an area where secondary occupancy has taken place? We will discuss these and other questions after the presentation on the Nigeria case study.
All right, so I'm going to ask Rhoda to start the presentation on the Nigeria case study, and I'm going to control the slides, Rhoda, so you can just tell me when you want me to switch, okay?
Yes, please, Lopez, I'm ready. You can share your screen. Thank you.
Okay. Can you see the slides?
Yes, we can see the slides. Thank you.
Okay. Floor is yours, Rhoda.
All right, so good afternoon, everyone. From Nigeria, it's noon. So welcome to this platform, and I'm going to be sharing with you some little context knowledge on secondary occupancy here in Northeast Nigeria. And just like Lopez had introduced me, my name is Rhoda Usman. I work with IOM, Northeast Nigeria. I'm currently the HLP advisor. So yeah, Lopez, you can change the slide. So based on the context in Northeast Nigeria, we have been suffering from armed conflict since the year 2009. And we have recorded a lot of displacement. According to the DTM assessment in the Northeast Nigeria displacement tracking metrics, round 36, which was carried out in May this year, we still have about 2 million people still living in displacement. Now, the conflict has affected the northeastern part of the country, basically the Borno state, the Yobe state, and the Adamawa state being the most affected states in the region. And currently we have people living in both camps and out of camp settings, mostly in informal settlements and either emergency shelters. Some are still living in makeshift shelters. We have people renting. We have people occupying by way of squatters or secondary occupants and the likes of it. Next slide, please. Now, this map is showing the towns with significant reported cases of secondary occupants here in the Northeast Nigeria. And the indicator on the map is showing locations where IOM has a significant presence. Most of these locations are Ngala town, which is a local government area under the Borno state. Dikwa also, we have Bama, we have Banki, which is a town under Bama LGA. We have Goza also. So these 5 locations majorly have recorded a significant cases of secondary occupants. So when the conflict first started, most of the residents of this area were able to flee either back into the town in Maiduguri, as you can see it right there at about the northeastern part of the map. There are people moving into the big towns of Maiduguri, which is the state capital, And while others were able to move to the neighboring country, Cameroon, via the border, because if you look at the boundary, you would see that most of these towns share a boundary with the Cameroonian country. Next slide, please. Now, I'm going to be focusing majorly on Goza and Bama, specifically because these two towns have recorded a significant increase in reported cases of secondary occupation, basically because earlier this year, the Borno State government embarked on a return strategy for IDPs, or I would say refugees that fled into the Cameroonian border. So during the displacement, a lot of Nigerians fled into Cameroon and were camped in Minowao, a location in Cameroon. And early this year, the Nigerian government, through the state governor of Borno State, signed an agreement to return IDPs who are in the Minowao camp. So the Minowao camp was closed down around March and April this year, and we recorded a significant influx of returnees from Minowao camp back to the areas of Bama town and Banki areas, and also Goza. So we have noticed a significant increase in cases of secondary occupants. So a lot of people have been returned. Now, the strategy was supposed to be that a lot of this host community, especially in Banki, which is a town under Bama, it is significantly unoccupied. Most of the people are living within a camp-like settlement. And the arrangement was that only IDPs whose houses are within the host community, which was not in occupation as at early this year, were going to be returned from Minowao camp, because it would be returned into the Banki host community, because within the Banki camp, we have a lot of secondary occupants. So in order to prevent cases of forced eviction, supposedly only IDPs in the host communities were to be profiled for return. However, this was not properly conducted, and we noticed a significant return of people whose houses are within the camp, which are currently occupied by secondary occupants. So the arrow there is showing the influx and outflux of people during the conflict and back during the return. And towards the yellow part of the map is Cameroon, and you would see that Minowao camp is located just somewhere outside the border of Nigeria. Thank you. Next slide. Now, we have recorded 3 significant types of secondary occupants. One of it is the military assigned secondary occupant. This is majorly the case in Banki town. Like I said earlier, the Banki town is a town that there's no longer host community. Everybody is living in a camp-like settlement with a military garrison, with military trenches built round about the location. So everybody within the camp is an IDP. Now, there are a few houses within the camp which belonged to members of the primary occupants of Banki, who have initially fled into Cameroon and were settled in the Minowao camp. So when the military came and took over the town from the armed opposition group, the non-state actors, they took upon themselves, being the primary authority there, to allocate some of these houses to IDPs. Okay, so IDPs were allocated these houses for residence by the military in Banki town. And secondly, we have assigned secondary occupants that are assigned by local authorities. Now, in Nigeria, we have basically another structure of government that is recognized, the informal system. Now, we have traditional leaders who occupy the positions of leadership mostly in these areas, because the government formal system has been undermined by the conflict. Most of these areas are now under the authority of the traditional structure of government. So being that a lot of houses were unoccupied, as at the time of early stages of the displacement, most of the primary occupants have fled. The local authorities, being the traditional leaders and the community leaders, took it upon themselves to assign some of these houses for occupation to IDPs. But in return, we have recorded a high cases of fraud in some of these allocations, because we have recorded cases where some of these community leaders have in fact sold these houses to IDPs And in other cases, they are renting and collecting monies from these IDPs. Some of them posing as actual owners of this property. And we've seen that a lot of times when the people, original owners, come back, we receive a lot of complaints around cases of evictions and cases of disputes around ownership and the likes. And lastly, we have individual occupation. This is mostly predominant in Bama Town, Goza, and Dikwa Town, where people, on arriving the displacement location, just went into occupation of houses that are vacant, being that the primary occupant had fled earlier during the conflict, so they mostly just go into occupation of this property. Next slide. Now, like I said earlier, the reported HLP issues as a result of this secondary occupancy is 1, forced evictions. This mostly occurs upon return of the original owners of this property. They mostly send packing those secondary occupants. And also we've had cases of ownership disputes. Like I mentioned earlier, cases where these IDPs have paid money, they have advanced money to fraudulent people or imposters as owners to buy this property, or are in fact renting, and then another person is showing up to claim ownership of that property. So we've recorded cases ranging on that. Mostly it has remained a little bit difficult to resolve because most of the original owners of this property do not even have title documents to prove ownership. So we have adopted a lot of other means to resolve some of these issues, you know, like the use of the local authority, the traditional leaders in profiling original owners and the likes. And also we have recorded high cases of secondary displacement. Since the return of IDPs from Minowao camp early this year in March and April, we have recorded high influx of IDPs from out of camp settings into camps, especially in Bama Town, where IOM is the lead in camp coordination and camp management. We have recorded a high influx of IDPs from within Bama Town into the camp site because they have been displaced by the primary owners of this property and they have nowhere else to go. So they move into the camps, and this has resulted in high congestions of the camp because there's limited, almost no room for camp expansion to accommodate this influx. Next slide, please. Now, IOM as an organization and with the help of the HLP subsector here in the Northeast Nigeria have adopted a lot of steps in order to resolve some of these issues. One of these steps carried out by IOM is that December last year, IOM conducted a shelter and HLP assessment in some local government areas of Borno State. The objective of the assessment was to understand the living arrangements of the host community, returnees, and IDPs, and also to identify the gaps related to shelter response in out-of-camp situations, and also to provide recommendations for strategic planning. So we mainstreamed a lot of HLP-related questions as to ownership, tenure arrangement. We conducted a lot of FGDs and key informant interviews just to find out information around the living arrangements in out-of-camp areas. We carried out this assessment in 9 local government areas covering about 12 towns. And also currently the HLP unit here in IOM is conducting tenure mapping in Banki and Bama Town. The objective is to profile all the tenure arrangements of residents of these 2 towns. So it would give us an basic information. We would be able to see how many people actually own their properties, how many are renting, how many people are secondary occupants, how many people are living, and also we are also collecting data on the type of shelter they're saying. So this will provide a lot of background information for improved shelter intervention in out-of-camp areas. And this is an exercise we hope to continue to cover other locations if this goes well. And we have also carried out trainings and workshops for HLP actors to strengthen existing HLP dispute mechanisms in out-of-camp areas of Bama and Banki. Currently, we have started steps in that direction to conduct some of these workshops. And we have also executed some workshops here in Borno State where we targeted government stakeholders, primarily the HLP actors, who have influence in HLP administration here in Borno State. And we also look forward to replicating the same workshop in neighboring Yola town, where IOM is currently considering a lot of shelter projects in out-of-camp areas of Adamawa State. And also IOM is working with the HLP subsector to provide HLP and collaborative dispute resolution trainings for CCC and protection actors, especially targeting national organizations. And also IOM has provided input in some of the HLP dispute resolution in Banki, specifically in resolving some of the cases of evictions and secondary displacement in the camp of Banki town. Next slide, please. Thank you very much. With this, I've come to the end of my presentation. Thank you. Over to you, Lopez.
Thank you, Rhoda. Thank you so much for this very clear presentation, especially on the context and also on the different cases that you find there in Northeast Nigeria. I'm going to open now for discussion and for Q&A. First, we're going to do a Q&A session, so we can ask Rhoda for clarification on other questions that you may have, and then we can further discuss the issue later. So, over to you. Any questions?
Hello, good morning, everyone. One question. May I go ahead?
Hello.
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 Are you getting me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah. My name is Musa. I am Shelter Cluster Coordinator in Cameroon. I have just one question regarding how to address the issue of secondary occupancy. I want just to give some complex situation. I was deployed in Burundi in 2007 as a civil engineer to support reintegration activity. One of our big issues where we encounter was secondary occupancy. You can see one property have been won by several persons with legal documents, and that was one of big issue we have. How to address some kind of issue. Over to you.
Hi, brother. Do you want to take the question?
Sorry, I didn't quite get his question, to be honest.
So he's asking about an experience in Burundi where they were dealing with secondary occupants, and then he said that he could find several claimants to the same property that had legal documents for the property. So how do you deal with that situation?
All right. So a similar situation has happened here in Nigeria, and one of the ways we adopt to resolve it is, well, I would not tell you if there is a standing rule on how to resolve this, because for us we take it on a case-by-case situation, because circumstances may vary, even though the facts may be similar. So what we did in this case was to use the local, the traditional leaders in resolving some of these issues. Now, the structure here in Nigeria is quite organized. We have different tiers of government, even in the traditional system. So it is so organized that we have leaders down to areas, small community level. And these leaders are so close to the residents that they know who owns what property and down to what relationship they have. Now, in most of these areas, one way you acquire ownership of property is through the customary ownership system, where the documents and allocation is carried out by the following the customary system. So we have communal ownership of property, and the community can sell those property. So while they may not have documentations that are like formal, like we do in the formal structure, they have some way of documenting and identifying ownership. So even in a situation where there's a sale of that same property from the original grant, or the person that was originally granted the ownership of that property, whoever is buying must obtain some form of documentation from the local community leader. So he informs him, and they will issue some of kind of a written document, so mostly in the local language of that area, stating that this property has been sold to this person from this person at this amount. And they even go as far as signing. And also the district head, who is like the next in the tier, also signs that document. And also, so we rely on some of these documentations and the date the transaction was carried out to identify who is the bona fide owner of this property. And where documentation is impossible to find by either reason that it was never documented or those documents have been lost, we rely on the expert witnesses, like not necessarily expert witnesses, but neighbors that were either in occupation of that property or other properties around this property in dispute, or owners of properties around the property in dispute. So we rely on their testimonies as to who they know to be the owner of this property. So these are some of the little ways we have adopted, and yes, it has worked. So like I said, we treat it on a case-by-case issue. We do not really have a standing guiding principle on how to go about resolving it. Thank you. I hope I addressed your question effectively, Musa.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thanks, brother. Thank you very much. Let me just call on Umbretta. She had her hand up. Umbretta, do you want to ask a question?
Thanks, Ibera. Thanks a lot, Rhoda. I'm Umbretta from UN Habitat, based in Cairo. Actually, the question just before this one, this question answered mine, but I have another small question, maybe a clarification. I didn't fully understand if you referred as secondary occupation also for structure inside camps, or not, only of houses outside the camps. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Umberta. Actually, why I refer to secondary occupation in camp settlements is because we have a situation here in Nigeria. Earlier in my presentation, I made mention of Banki. Now, Banki is a town under Bama, and initially the primary occupants of Banki town were hit first by the insurgency, and they fled into Cameroon, being the closest town to Banki. So they fled into Cameroon and were camping in Minawawo camp under the management of the Cameroonian government. Now, there were other settlements around Banki town which were initially not affected by the insurgency. So later on, when the insurgents hit those communities, the people then fled into Banki town. Now, prior to this, the government structures there were highly affected, so only the military are the authority there currently as we speak in Banki town. So for efficient security purposes, they moved everybody to a camp-like settlement, digging trenches around to provide security for the IDPs. Now, the location where this camp was set up has houses in them, which are originally owned by those IDPs that fled into Minawawo in Cameroon. So the military themselves allocated those empty properties to IDPs to stay in temporarily, pending when maybe the host community will be reopened, because there were people that were in the host community, but the military could not provide security if everybody is stretched out to occupy other properties. So they moved them to a confined area where they can be able to provide them with safety. Now, so the military then allocated those houses within the location where the camp was sited. So we now have IDPs living in houses owned by others who have fled into Cameroon. Now, earlier this year in March, when the government closed down the Minawawo camp, IDPs returned back into Banki. Even though the government in Borno State had declared the host community open, that IDPs can move back into their houses in the host community, we discovered that the security has not improved much. So for fear of their lives, these IDPs have refused to move into the host community. They have instead moved into the camp, the Banki camp. Now, some of these returnees actually own those houses that have been allocated by the military to the IDPs and are seeking to re-enter possession of those properties. So we have started experiencing a lot of cases of forced evictions, cases of secondary displacement and the likes. So this is the situation. It's quite peculiar. It's not like we have secondary occupancy in camps everywhere, but except in Banki. Most of the other camps are set up on public lands, empty spaces allocated by the government, and camps are set up there with emergency shelters. But in Banki, we actually have houses in the camp area. So yes, that is why we have secondary occupancy in camps, only in Banki.
Thank you. Thanks.
Does that answer your question, Nombreto?
Yes, yes, thanks. That was very clear.
So basically they have houses in camps, right? That's why. Jim, I see your hand up as well.
Yeah, thanks. And thank you, Rhoda, for the presentation. It sounds like a really fascinating and complex case with so many different actors involved. And I wondered, my question was about the dispute mechanisms, and I was wondering how much you work with the military and the government as parties to those disputes, as well as maybe that they support the dispute mechanisms as well. Because you mentioned there that the military might have assigned a house to someone, and then that the original owner has returned and then finds their house occupied. So I wondered how you work with the government and military on that. And also when you work with the local authorities, you mentioned that there were cases where there were sort of fraudulent activities where homes were being sold or released for rent. So I just, would be interested to know how you worked with those different authorities as part of those dispute mechanisms, and maybe a little bit how those mechanisms worked. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Jim, for that question. So on the dispute resolution mechanisms, whether or not we work with the military and government, well, for Banki, it is actually very difficult to work with the military because as far as they were concerned, they have assigned it. And if we have issues now that there are huge humanitarian presence, they expected that the humanitarian should cover the gap for the dispute resolution. So no, we do not necessarily work with the military because even because of their rotation rule, most of these people that originally carried out this the allocation of this property are no longer in Banki for some reason. So we cannot really even meet them for dispute resolution. And yes, also by nature of their job, they may not be for that kind of activity. However, we work with SEMA. All right, there's this State Emergency Management Agency who are the camp coordinators, camp managers. Yes, they're the camp managers. So we partner with them in camp management. So they help in providing solutions to some of these issues, like advocacy for camp expansion, so we can construct emergency shelters for some of this, either the secondary occupants to move out or to host temporarily the primary occupants pending the resolution of the dispute as to who owns it. Because like I said earlier, some of these primary occupants come back with no title documents to prove ownership. And because the return is a little bit not well organized, sometimes it is difficult to identify neighbors to help you in proving your ownership and all that. So these are some of the steps we have taken. And yes, through the HLP subsector here, we are currently advocating and raising awareness on the issues of secondary occupancy with the government here in Borno State. And we're advocating for access to land for camp expansions and camp decongestion. So we hope that if we're able to get some of these approvals through, we would be able to expand these camps and possibly decongest. And as for Banki, we are advocating for improvement in security so that these people can move back into their homes, because some of the secondary occupants actually own properties just outside the camp within the host community. But because it is not safe for them to return, they still remain in occupation of that. One of the few methods we have adopted to resolve this dispute is that in a situation where it is small family, we try to negotiate for some kind of a hosting arrangement where both the secondary occupant and the primary occupant will occupy the same property together, pending when a more durable solution can be reached. And secondly, how we work with the local authority, especially with cases of fraud, is that, like I said, the traditional structure here in Nigeria is very well organized. So where the community leader of the area in dispute is in fact a party to the dispute, we do not consult him for resolution. Instead, we involve the higher traditional leader. So here we have the direct community leader, and then we have the district head who supervises them, and then we also have the ward heads. So we have the community leaders, the ward heads, and then the district heads. So where mostly the challenges comes with the community leaders themselves. They're the ones that mostly meddle in this kind of arrangement, fraudulent arrangement. So where a community leader is in fact a party to the dispute, we go directly to the ward head and then to the district head if the case persists or we are unable to reach an amicable settlement. So these are some of the methods we have adopted so far on a case-by-case basis to resolve some of these issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and Jim, I get your point, because I mean, if you have the local authorities involved in some of these allocations of empty houses, and then even you know, getting rent from the IDPs and selling the houses, and at the same time you have the military involved in allocating the houses as well, then how can you find a neutral party to mediate or to arbitrate the situations, right?
Yeah, and that seems like a real challenge there, and with people so kind of some of the parties really tied to that community as well. So it must be very difficult when you've got the community leaders then also causing some of the challenges to then have people kind of able to stay there and live there when they're trying to sort their claim out.
Yeah, and I like this. Sorry, is there any other questions? I just want to make a quick comment. I like this example because it shows us the importance of understanding the context where you're working. Because if you walk in blind into this situation, right, or semi-blind, let's say, and you start establishing dispute resolution mechanisms involving all these authorities without understanding the connections between the authorities and the interests that are behind, then you have a high risk of causing harm, which is one of the concerns here. I have a last question for you, Rhoda, before we have to close up, which is this. You mentioned that the government had a return program to bring people back from Cameroon, and that they were supposed to bring only the people that had empty houses on Nigeria's side. So what went wrong? What went wrong?
Well, if I must say, I would say there was no proper coordination and information sharing, because the humanitarian sector was a little bit blindsided when it comes to the arrangements and how they carried out this return program. It was more like a unilateral decision by the Nigerian government to return, and then they gave dates, and then they carried out the return. So there was no proper planning and information sharing and coordination. So yeah, so everything went wrong. All we knew was that the date was announced for the return, and that the government said they had carried out repairs within the host communities for the returnees, and only returnees with houses in the host communities have been profiled for the return. But however, we discovered there was no proper profiling of returnees. In fact, everybody was returned. Okay, so initially there was a date that was shared, and then the return did not take place on that same date because of poor arrangement. Then another date again was communicated, and on that day, yes, we experienced an influx of the returnees. However, it was poorly coordinated. as opposed to the information shared that houses have been rehabilitated, we discovered that there was no proper rehabilitation shelters. Most of them just had roof sheetings placed. There was no windows and doors. Most of the structures remained reasonably damaged. There was no clearing of debris because some of these houses have been demolished or have bullet holes in them, which affected tremendously the structure of those houses, making them unsafe for habitation. But none of those things was actually properly conducted, and so most of these people could not even go back to those houses regardless of the fact that they own them, and it remained largely unsafe at night because the military does not expand its watch to cover the community. They remain restricted only to the campsite. So while some of them may go into their houses in the daytime to carry out certain activities like clearing and fetching of firewoods and stuff like that, they do not sleep there. They come back into the camp to pass the night. So yeah, that is some of the challenges that we faced and the poor coordination of the return. So yeah, that led to the increase of the HLP dispute and the displacement in the camp areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Rhoda. Thank you so much for this fascinating presentation. We're going to be evicted now from this from this chat room because the next session is going to be on the same link. So I think we need to close the session. I'm going to note down your question, Nadia, and we'll take it up later on.
Thank you very much, Lucas, for this wonderful opportunity.
Thank you. And then the next session will start on the future of coordination in 13 minutes time. So I look forward to seeing you all back again there. So we're going to end the meeting now. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye. Cheers.